Hi, this is John Rowell for the Rowell Report. Today is Monday, December 1st, 2025, and I've come across a puzzling announcement from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, and that is that the Russian army liberated the settlement of Klynove in the Donetsk People's Republic. Some also call this the Independent Republic of Donetsk because it voted out of Ukraine to become an independent republic and then was accepted by Russia and incorporated into the Russian Constitution. So officially, and at least in Russian sources, it's called the DPR. So here we have a city called Klynove. So anyway, one of the easier Ukrainian town names to pronounce. But anyway, why do I say that it is puzzling? So here we go. Move myself over here. So here we can zoom in. So here we have Klynove. Well, the town isn't spelled exactly the same. So is this a case of a mistaken town name? In any case, the whole announcement is odd. Why do I say that? Because the town before it, which seems to be quite lengthy, and I'm sure which the Ukrainians have multiple positions in, the Lyubivka town has not been taken, and there's no announcement of taking it. There is a natural barrier here, which is the train line. So this would be a very good town to take. Also, we have the forest areas, which can protect the soldiers from the drones. So you can see that there is that this is an advantageous city or town to have taken. And also you can see that there's a series of tree lines. If you can see the cursor, here's a tree line coming from the area which they already control, apparently, according to this map from the military summary. So we have a tree line that moves, first moves west and then north and then west again, and then continues west on a straight line, and then almost joins up with another forest area in the northern part of Lyubivka, and then finally reaches this town of Klynove. So you can see that there certainly is a quick route for soldiers to have taken. Possibly the soldiers were already working their way over, but if you know the city of Chasiv Yar, they've been fighting in this area since 2022. Making progress here is slow and difficult, and this is one of the areas that Ukraine had really invested a lot of soldiers, equipment, resources. So you know that the progress for the Russian Federation, the Russian forces in this area has been very slow. So then you see this massive movement towards this town, Klynove. You kind of wonder whether that is actually to be believed or not. But certainly you can see the advantages for the Russians to have made this move over. If this is in fact the case, you have to the north, you have a natural border where a defensive line can be held. You have the train line that that actually does join up with this town. So, and then joins up with this natural barrier coming down. So you can see that there would be a good reason, but if you have Ukrainian forces in these small towns to the north and to the south, then these soldiers that are trying to set up will certainly be um, hunted by the Ukrainian drone operators. So I'm kind of puzzled by having these forces moved so quickly without first having to cover their flanks. So it certainly seems like there is some information that needs to be filled in, and it was announced by the on the official Telegram site of the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. So certainly they're standing behind this announcement. So I'll go to another website here. This is the divgen.ru website. So you can see this whole area and where Klynove is at. It's right here. So you can see this is quite a bit far away from the area that the Russian forces were holding. If this is the case, then they are certainly putting a lot of forces on the move here in this area. But it is a little puzzling that this town right before it, Viroliubivka, was not taken first. That would be the logical progress of the Russian forces. So is this an announcement to try to move? This could also be done, with the forward advanced forces of the Russian army military. So they could do an operation into the town, place some flags, and then return back to safer quarters. All to try to pull troops away from other areas. Where could they be wanting to have them pull the troops? Well, it could be like Vovchansk in the north, Kupiansk, towards the Zaporizhia area. I think the Ukrainian forces are really struggling to get troops to put out fires in different areas. So this could be, the Russians creating kind of a whack-a-mole operation where the Ukrainians are forced to move troops, and when they move troops, then they go out in the open and they're much easier to track down rather than sitting in hardened defensive positions. So I find this announcement of the taking of this town to be quite odd, but at the same time, there certainly could be a logic and a strategy behind it. Of course, if they do have troops spread along this whole line, which can defend against any Ukrainian counterstrike, then they can spread north and spread south, and isolating Ukrainian soldiers in some of these smaller towns. So I thought this announcement to be puzzling, and there is one individual on a Telegram channel who has this channel called AMK Mapping, and said not to trust the Russian Ministry of Defense reports in this area. So he's basically saying that this is just fiction, that it really isn't true. So exactly what is going on? Usually when they announce the taking of a town, we get a video showing them how they did it. That hasn't been put out yet. Maybe that will come out today. But in any case, at least for 2 years, more than 2 years, Chasiv Yar was, well, it's just past Bakhmut. There's Bakhmut, so you can see Bakhmut. This this whole area has been fought over with a lot of losses on both sides. We know the Wagner group of forces was in Bakhmut, and they cleared out Bakhmut, but at a very high casualty rate, according to some sources. So the movement in this area has been very slow. Now, if they were actually to have taken this town and made this progress, then that could also be a sign that the Ukrainians are basically realizing that Konstantinovka is lost. At least the outskirts of the smaller towns aren't worth defending, so they may have pulled back, and the Russians could have seen that movement and could have moved in. So there could be a lot going on right now. The announcement that they took this town is not necessarily a false report. We can wait for more information. I would think that this area could also be, similar to the Zaporizhia area, where Ukraine begins to pull back forces from some areas they consider undefensible and not worth trying to defend. So if you go down to the here to the Zaporizhia area, the Russians advanced very quickly towards Uliapole, and that was because the Ukrainians had very thin defensive lines, and the ones holding those defensive lines were new recruits, so they were inexperienced and unable to hold the defensive lines. Apparently now the Ukrainians are sending more experienced troops to this area, and they're slowing down the Russian advance. But the Russians noticed the mismatch between their forces and the Ukrainian forces defending this area, and this cost the Ukraine the Uliapole city. The Russians are basically on the outskirts, and they will soon have the city surrounded on 3 sides. This is a very important historic city. This was the center of resistance to Russian forces. I believe there was I don't know if it was a leader of anarchists who was here, but anyway, they had their center of operations here, and then Russia had conquered that city some years ago, and so now we see again the Russian forces about to take the city of Uliapole. But the point here is that Russia recognized the mismatch. Now, is the situation the same here? You can even see how out this advance looks compared to the rest of the front line. So was this a total mismatch between the Russian troops and the Ukrainian defenders? So how are the Russians determining how many Ukrainians are on the defensive line, how capable they are, how much of a mismatch there is between the Russians and the Ukrainians in certain areas? So if the Russians are getting a good grasp over the depleted Ukrainian forces and the mismatch in highly trained soldiers versus new recruits, then this could be a bad sign for Ukraine. All they have to do is look for the mismatch and then overload that area. So really, it's hard to say if this will be confirmed or not, but if this is the case, this is very bad news for Ukraine. It probably signals another Russian avalanche in this area, similar to the Zaporizhia area, and we could see some rapid advancements towards Konstantinovka. At least if the Russians get along this, what looks to be a train line, then they will be within drone striking distance of anywhere in Konstantinovka, and artillery range. So this will just go from bad to worse. And if you take a look at Konstantinovka, it's also starting to get into a bind. It's now basically surrounded on three sides within a very wide open area. So you see, if the Russians were able to get to this Klynove, it's beginning to close off this area into a three-sided cauldron. So we will see how that goes. But anyway, I thought this whole announcement was quite odd. I would bring it to your attention, and the significance of it, and what this means for Ukraine and Russia. So we'll see going forward whether this is confirmed and whether Russia is able to hold it or not. And if it's not confirmed, then what would be the significance of that as well. So anyway, that is my video about this odd announcement, and some have called this fake news from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. We will see. And again, thank you for joining me, and wish you a very good day. Bye-bye.